All right, Craig Yarnell,
Yes, sir.
change my mind. You can build pro caliber legs without squatting. Change my mind.
I'm gonna go with no on that. Everybody has their
Tell me more.
issues with, training to squat. Squats are very difficult. They're a very exhausting exercise. I get it. But at the end of the day, when you want to really build a foundation, the pure strength aspect of a squat, there's nothing like it. And there's a lot of stability involved. It's not just going up and down. And sure, you have your pendulum squats, your squat machines that are out there. You have your belt loaded squats, and I use them as accessories. But my first exercise when I'm gonna know that I'm doing a leg workout, it's probably gonna be a squat, an actual squat. And the machines do it too, except they will obviously take out the stabilizers. But at the same point, I still believe that like the one of the most humbling machines I've really done over the last probably 4 or 5 years that I've added in more is a pendulum squat. That machine is the devil, and it's very tough on my knees because of what I've had. And this is coming from a guy that'll still get under a squat ball. It really puts a lot of pressure on my knees. I tore both my patella tendons back in 2007, almost 20 years ago. And I still, from post surgery, I got into powerlifting a little more, and then eventually evolved back into bodybuilding, which is where I've always been. But still, bodybuilding still has my basics at heart. I will always keep in a squat and deadlifting as well too.
Which is why I open with that, because I had seen you posted before about your patella injuries, and I was just curious. So even with that, and then let's say some of the
Mhm.
athletes that you coach, I assume this is an assumption on my part. Maybe some of them deal with sort of niggling back injuries. Do you still try and program in squats?
Well, we'll try and see what we can do with it. And I will work with them. I'm not like probably more like, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I was probably a little more stubborn and I would probably not give in as much. But I still think with your client, you are, it's a compliment to both of you to work together. It's a two-way street that you have to involve them as well. If they can't do it, you're going to be driving through a brick wall that you can't that you can't get through. And there are plenty of alternatives for sure. And just like the deadlift is something where the real barbell goes in front of you and in front of your shins, a trap bar can make it a little more palatable for a lot of people too. And then if the handles are a little higher, it doesn't force them down as far. So there's a little variations that you can always do too. And I've given into those more over the last 5 to 10 years, I would say, than where I was years ago. And this was even post surgery. Still, I love the movements, and if you can do them, then let's keep them in.
Yeah, and I think that's an important piece. Like, if you can do them, let's keep them in. And I mean, I really want to touch on the part of your surgery. What was coming back to training like after the surgery? How long did it take? What was that recovery period like? When did you feel comfortable getting back at it?
Well, the first 2 weeks, I really basically was bedridden. I was in braces from my hips to my ankles, and the knees were locked, and you couldn't move, and you basically kind of waddled around with them. And for the first 2 weeks, I was basically, like I said, bedridden. And then post that, I started to try and drive to the gym down the road, which was maybe 5 minutes away. But my car was a stick, and I don't know how the hell I did it, but I did. And I went and did upper body at the gym
Back
2 weeks
clutch.
later. And obviously, about 2 weeks post, I had to start taking the braces off, and I started working with a home physical therapist, and she helped me basically start getting more range of motion in my knees, where I eventually went to another therapist where I drove to. But it was probably close to a good year, and even then, my legs were always my strong point. Before that, they were always something that stood out for me as a bodybuilder. And to look at them when they came out of the braces, it was like, just a cry, make you want to cry, because the atrophy was so bad. And I just kept trying to work at it and work at it, whether it was body weight squats to begin with, and then, eventually getting down and getting my depth. Like, probably if the doctor saw what I do today, they probably would still freak out at me because of what I do today with my legs. And like I said, the two big things that I feel like are really push the knees a little bit are the pendulum squat and the hack squat. And I've put them both into my programming, obviously on the accessory side, so more towards the end, where I could maybe use a little lighter weight, but it's still very difficult. And I wear the SBD sleeves all the time too on most of my leg workouts, so my knees are pretty tight in those compression sleeves. And it's a workout just trying to get those things on before I even start my workout. But they help a lot. And I went pretty good this week, and still had my from the snow we had here, and then I did a hamstring workout and a hamstring and glute workout. One of my knees kind of just swelled up, and every so often that happens. And then I went like 2 or 3 days after the swelling, and I still went and did 335 for 6 on a squat, which is still pretty good for me. And then I did the deadlifts yesterday, and I went up to 464 for 2. And
Double, shoot.
I just keep trying to ice it. And sometimes I feel like, and I know this is not probably common, but I like to say if I start getting a little more bending in my knees, it helps to open the knee back up, and it helps me to feel better in my knee. It might not seem common, and I'm still trying to ice it. I would put some, Tiger Balm on it, but eventually, they're doing pretty good, I would say.
So you've done some things to adjust over the years, and it took some time. I'm curious, are you a high bar person, low bar person? Where is your positioning as far as the squat goes?
Generally, I would say it's more closer to the high bar position, just because of bodybuilding being my first thing. It's probably mostly where most of us sit the bar as a bodybuilder, where I think a lot more of the powerlifters will do that. And I know some size and different leg lengths and stuff will also be something to look at towards where you place the bar. But yeah, I'm a high bar person, I would say.
It's interesting you bring up leg lengths. Comes to mind different anthropometries. You said training the individual, bodybuilding bikini, Yorton Cup champs, the training doesn't change much at all. What do you mean?
Mm-hmm. I don't really change my programming. It's like if I have a bikini girl, she's getting the bodybuilding program. If I have a bodybuilder, he or she is getting the same program. There might be certain exercises for that body part or for that movement that they might like a little more than the other person, but it's still going to be relatively the same. Your genetics are going to carry you where you belong. And if you push everything to the best of your abilities, you're going to let genetics carry you to your class, and your coach and you will put you, for your most success, will put you in the right class if they know what they're doing. And if you're supposed to be, if you're a figure girl, you're going to be a figure girl. If which figure can kind of vary more towards muscular side. You could even see them doing physique and stuff. But at the end of the day, I've trained some bikini competitors, and they've done years of heavier lifting, and they're not going to go much beyond that. And but they need as a natural competitor, you are going to have to push a lot more of the basics than you see someone that's going to do something that's enhanced and possibly have to use, where they could get a response from doing some of the simplest things that we watch on Instagram reels and stuff like that we're not going to get a response to. It's like, well, there's no tension on your muscles. There's nothing working there. But, when you have something being aided and, work aside, because we're all working, whether you're enhanced or not, that has nothing to do with the amplification of the muscle gains and the fat losses that they will have that we won't get. So the basic foundations are like if you could, like I said almost the other day, I was talking about, because someone brought up powerlifting the other day. See You Later Leaner. I can't remember his name. He does a podcast with Dr. Joe. I can't remember his name now. But he brought up 2 women that went into either fit model or bikini. Not much difference there. You might use more in the NPC. But both girls came from powerlifting backgrounds. And those girls looked incredible because of the base foundation they had created. Show me a power lifter with no butt, and you're gonna have, it's gonna be hard to find. It's just not gonna happen. They work, they have the ability to work their upper bodies, and they do, and they don't stray away from it. Where sometimes you'll see that in a prescription or a programming from some of the coaches that do NPC wellness or bikini, where I'm not skipping body parts, I'm not skipping arms, and like there's no reason to avoid muscle groups and cause imbalances in your body as well, which is just, it seems like the antithesis of what you're trying to do in bodybuilding, which is supposed to be about symmetry and balance. And, you know, our bodies are going to respond how they want to respond. There's times where you can do specialization programs, maybe for 6 to 8 week clips, where you're trying to bring up a lagging body part. But even in natural bodybuilding, if you have a body part that stands out incredibly, let it go. Don't not train it, do it, because that's going to still leave some kind of thing in the judge's head when they see you on stage. And you're better off training it than trying to balance it out with other body parts. That's what I would see as far as that goes.
So what about some of the categories that are sort of your almost imbalance categories? So like let's talk about women's wellness and men's physique. You have a balanced approach to training. Don't leave any, and I'm not suggesting, you know, don't train certain body parts, but for these categories where for the men, the V taper, the cap delts, and honestly the genetics, you know, the longer clavicles, you can't really train that.
Yeah.
And then for women's wellness, the dominant lower body, would your training at all shift for those categories?
No, it's going to show up in how their response is to the stimulus. So you're going to see, I had last year, my girl won the OCB Conquer for Pro Wellness, where she last year was 25, 24. She placed last in the Pro Wellness. It was her first pro show. And then this past year, 25, she did the show with me, and she won the whole Pro Wellness category. And we focused, her lower half is insane. And there's still, like you said, there's an imbalance where, you know, genetically you're going to see a structure where maybe their clavicles aren't as long, and you're going to see a little smaller. But in natural bodybuilding, like you might not see that much of an imbalance as you would as opposed to an NPC or an IFBB wellness girl, where they almost don't train the upper body almost at all. Where we still want to see that. You know, you're probably going to see, like, if your lower half is dominant, you're going to see it. And this is where, you know, you try not, and then depending on how you pose, you can kind of put some of that stuff away and not pose it as hard up top, and not make it look as V-tapered by doing certain poses, and kind of toning down the lower half, the upper half, and leaving the upper half to shine. So yeah. And then even like in men's physique too, the thing that I've also noticed lately, yes, you know, they could get away without training legs, but lately, if you haven't seen, the men's physique shorts have gotten tighter and they've gotten shorter. So you are going to start seeing some butt, you are going to start seeing some legs. And regardless, if the judges don't always see that as a part of the criteria, they are going to notice it. And when you start to look like, you know, you want to say a light bulb, they're going to see it, and that can make it look distracting. And so I think they have to start, if they don't, they have to start bringing their lower halves in a little bit more, which you see some of these guys, because there's plenty of guys in the men's physique class that don't belong there. They should be in like either classic or even bodybuilding. And there's plenty, just like even in the classic and you can have the arguments with classic and men's bodybuilding being very similar too. Just different pair of shorts, and a couple of poses.
Excellent points. Like with the men's physique thing, like sitting at the judge's table, like I often think about, like, I need to see your legs. You need to have well-developed legs, not as well-developed as bodybuilding or classic physique per se, but if your shorts are so baggy that I can't see your development at all, I can't really score you as well as I could have. And so I think, yeah, the shorts are getting a little bit tighter. They're getting a little bit more form-fitting. And, you know, I think that's positive in a way, because you want to see a well-trained athlete there. I want to bring up a picture for you to take a look at. What does it take to get these kind of results?
When you do a prep, you are going to devote 20 to 30 weeks, depending on the person, But I like to start most people off in that 26-week time frame, 6 months more or less, and that's going to give you adequate time for just human nature, for plateaus, especially for women sometimes, because when you prep women too, 3 out of 4 weeks are where you're going to see something relatively decent, and then you're going to have their cycle. So you have to work around that with women, and that plays a big part in how you're going to prep them as well too. And I give generic numbers for most women, as long as they're not having to lose a massive amount of weight. And if they are, that's really going to be hard to even fit. But most women, a half a pound to 3/4 of a pound per week, 2 to 3 pounds per month is adequate. And when you have to go over that, you're going to need more time. Like, you're going to have to do a prep before the prep. Men, their weights vary a lot more because they're a lot bigger, but most men will fall in the 1 to 3 pounds per week. 3 is really pushing it if you're a bigger guy, but most people are going to fall in the 1 to 2, 2.5 pounds per week. I would say 3, 4 to 5, 6 per month, as far as as far as dropping weight. And some of the guys that I've worked with Frank Gigante and then Jason Childs, they're the two top guys, and they came in first and third at the Battle of the Gods last year. Well, 2 times ago, 24, because last year Frank just competed this year. But Jason won it, and then Frank came in third. They both won their short and tall class in that show.
Wow.
And those two guys have been just an amazing time to work with them, because they bring a level of leanness that you just don't see. Just like with Kristen, who was my Yorton Cup champion, she took a three-peat this year through the 3 OCB shows, where I did a mock peak week with her because I wanted to run a mock peak week with her before the Yorton Cup, to make sure I knew what I was, getting into with her. And we ran the mock peak week, and in the middle of the week, I said, contact the Virginia Apex show and see if you could still enter, and I dare you to go down and do the show. And we didn't even fully do the full peak week everything, but we did most of the peak week that I needed to see what I wanted to with their food and everything. And she went down to the Apex and won the whole show. And it was probably her best look of all the 3 shows that she won. And then she did the Yorton and won the Yorton, and then she did the Masters Nationals and won the Masters Nationals. So she went 3 for 3. So she had a pretty amazing year for female bodybuilding. So
that was an incredible run that she had.
And I trained her like I told you, like anybody else, the way I train. Like a lot of these programs that I do them myself before I even pass them off to my clients. So and there's plenty of glute stuff in there for the bikini competitors. I do them too. I watch, follow Brett's channel, see some things that he does, and no matter how hard some of that stuff looks that the girls do, I'll try it and see how I feel doing it. And I'll bring it up to my team and give them videos and have them try them too, even ones that aren't competing, ones that are in off season, and give them other possibilities in the glute factors as far as trying to build that. And just like I said, today glutes are important for almost any class. And when you can figure out how to work them from the stretch position, the shortened position, the rotary position, there's all those 3 different areas to get all the whole entire glutes involved. So
that brings up an interesting thing that I like to ask this for coaches. Do you think bodybuilders sometimes chase glutes too much and sacrifice size? Have you encountered that in your coaching? What have you seen?
I haven't seen it yet. Like you said, not everybody is going to come up with glutes like Greg Trombley. I don't know if you've ever seen, he's a smaller guy, but his glutes get insanely shredded. Or even the guy that goes by Shreddy Krueger. He was a guy out in the Midwest. He just won his OCB pro card. His glutes get insanely lean. And then even, I can't remember all of them, even what's his name? Leroy Rollins from Canada.
Rollins.
He's gotten, Rollins, yeah. He runs Natty News Daily with a couple of the other guys, Danny Cole and Luke Johnson. I think that's right. And he's gotten some really insane glutes too. And none of my team, like you said, I don't know if I'll ever, I've gotten some lines in my glutes, but I don't know with the way my body and my body fat is set up and my cells, my fat cells, where I could get that type of like glutes like Frank on my team gets, or the way Jason gets, or these other guys we mentioned. There's just, we're all preset to how many fat cells we have. And the ones that get that insanely shredded look don't start out with as many fat cells as the others. So their skin has that paper thin ability to get like that because of because of just less fat cells in general. We don't lose them or gain them. They either get smaller or bigger. And that's where people, think that you could just get rid of fat. Well, if you get them sucked out, that's the whole deal. But, that's not going to happen for most people. So, yeah.
I'm curious, do you think fat distribution can change over a competitor's career?
I think men can generally see some changes if they were heavier, but guys, how guys can hold weight in their bellies, and maybe a little bit in their glutes. I think that they can have some changes, but I think the girls over time, and as they get into their 40s and stuff, they can have more fat cells come into their midsection, perimenopause and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a hard, there's so many things that are trying to be done right now. What's a Bill down in Florida, he's doing a lot of perimenopause research. Yeah, Bill Campbell. Yeah,
Bill Campbell.
And he's doing very well with yes, and he's doing a lot of the studies that are very helpful to the women. But a lot of this stuff that really comes down to, if you want to go into your 40s lifting heavy and lifting strong, you're probably going to fight perimenopause better than most other women that aren't. And that goes for, I've been saying this since the 90s, and since used to see like Kiana back in the day on ESPN early in the morning, I think in the early 90s and late 80s, and you used to see that, and you used to see them on TV. And I just like, man, women should just start lifting, because as long as they're not, using anything, it's a very great image to see, and how it fights, the bone issues and the osteoporosis and all the other things that come when you don't do that, or when you do excessive cardio and you don't, like most gen pops, are going to have a good mixture of weight training and cardio, because you got to have a healthy heart too. But at the end of the day, some like to throw in classes, and some like to throw in Pilates, and some like to throw in yoga, and stuff is entire week, which I don't personally have a problem with that, because I'm a big weight strength training proponent, I'm sure, as you are, and the results and so many of the things. It's like, even the bigger, is what I've seen too lately, that more of the corporate gyms, whether you say Planet Fitness and Crunch, have taken away a good portion of the cardio equipment, and have started to add more strength training component machines into their gyms, which is showing,
thank goodness,
what's going on. And even I hate I'm not a big corporate gym fan. I like to go to the gyms that are more small business. You get more out of those, in my opinion. But it's a lot more easier for people to get to these other gyms. Well, Crunches are almost around every street corner that you go right now. They've really blown up lately, and it's just, you got to deal with the crowds in those places, which I'm not dealing with that.
You had mentioned training or programming for older lifters. What are some changes and or things you wish older lifters would know about training and or nutrition?
Well, the big one is still, and this is something for ladies, is still the protein factor that a lot of them have a hard time doing. Over the years of working with lots of women, they're averse to it, or I don't know if there's an issue with it. They do not consume protein the way men do. So it's a big thing that you have to get, especially they talk about this even through perimenopause. So you try and get them to eat enough protein. It's so important for muscle, saving their muscle, for conserving, muscle as they try and work out and, keep their muscle and keep their bones strong. So it's such a big thing that you have to do with the females. And so you just keep working through those things as far as that goes. And the guys, guys will eat any kind of protein you throw in front of them for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
But then you got to try and say, we need to get less marbling, less fat in the sources that you're consuming, because that's where the saturated fats can overtake things. And that's where, keto diets and carnivore diets start to have issues with blood pressure, plaque, and other things that people don't, just because they're not, looking good on the outside, and they're skipping a bunch of other carbohydrates and things like that. But there's still a lot of stuff that goes on internally with the fat and the plaque. So it's getting them to do that. And then you try and, everybody's got injuries. And when you start dealing with older people, you're going to have to start dealing with injuries and issues and surgeries and hip replacements and knee replacements. And you're going to have to modify the exercise. And sometimes you'll start with a higher squat, which I know, I'm preaching depth on squats to everybody, but with some of them, you're not going to be able to do it. And, you're going to take what you can get from them. And sometimes when I see older people, because I train an older couple in a Planet Fitness, and sometimes you just see older people there, and it's like, they're moving, and you got to take it. They're doing something. They're at the gym for an hour or so, and they're working out, and that's all you can ask for with a lot of them. And if you can direct them, if you can show them, that's even better. So when I work with my married couple, 178, 172, we work around their injuries that they have, and they enjoy doing the stuff and trying to keep up with any of the weight training that they can do. My guy that's 78, he's a fitness advocate. He used to run like crazy. And then he saw me one time training clients at my old gym, and I had this Cardio Sucks t-shirt on, and he says, I got to train with that guy. I don't know why he said, because he was always on the cardio equipment, and he eventually came to me, and he's been training with me for almost 10 years now. And I've been working with him ever since his wife passed away, and he's been amazing to work with. And he switched from the running because of foot injuries to his bike, and he still does, not in the winter, but now he does like 50-mile bike rides 2 or 3 times a week. And then he trains with me once a week, and then he goes other times. So like he's a retired lawyer, so he's done working, so he has the time, but like he's always figuring out a way to do a workout. And he'll go and do a lot of the stuff that we do on the days that I work with him and his wife. And I even got him,
Fountain of youth.
yeah, in probably around 70 years old, I got him to learn how to track macros. So if I can get a 70-year-old guy to learn how to track macros, anybody can do it. That's what I say.
That's fantastic. You bring up, protein, macros. You say one of your biggest influence was Dr. Joe Klemescu?
Klemzeski. Dr. Joe
Klemzeski, excuse me, Klemzeski.
Yes, yeah,
Honestly, call him Dr. K every now and then, Klemzeski.
Yes. He's been one of my biggest influencers, and I actually found him in a Natural Bodybuilding and Fitness magazine back in around 2000. And I finally gave in to my male testosterone and hired a coach, and he was my coach. And it was him that got me, like I had judges in 96, 97, 98 telling me like I don't know if you're ever going to get lean enough to win the show. Like that's what they told me, some of the judges, because that's what they said back then. And then I said, screw this, hire Dr. Joe. Mm-hmm. This was in the WMBF back in the day, and it was actually the NGA, because the NGA was the feeder to the WMBF when I started competing with them back in the day. So this was a long time ago, because I finally found natural shows back in 1997. And here in New Jersey, and I kept doing Eddie Hernandez's show here in New Jersey, kept trying to win my pro card, and then eventually went to the Hercules in 2004 with Dr. Joe, and I won my pro card, winning. They had a super pro qualifier, so I just won the Bantams, which was 11, almost 10 to 15 clients in 5 weight classes of all bodybuilders. So they didn't even have all these different classes back then. And I won the Bantam class, about 137, 138 pounds back then, and won the show.
I mean, it's got to feel good to win in a class that size.
Yeah, and that's the way the classes were for bodybuilding back then.
What are the 3 biggest things you learned from Coach K over the years?
Well, number one was tracking the macros was such an important thing, and weighing everything and being specific with the macros per se. Because people will give out meal plans, and I'm not a big meal plan because it doesn't teach everybody anything. It's the old teach a person to fish, and they'll be able to do it for the rest of their lives instead of being fed a fish. And this is the thing where he taught me that. And sometimes you got to go low, talk about certain calorie ranges, and nobody should be under 1,200 calories. Well, I have girls that are 410, 411, and some of them have to go under like near 1,000 calories at the very end of prep. They're short, they're tiny. Would that be true for a 5'9", 5'10" girl? Probably not. But this is where I've seen that. And most I'm not a tall guy either. My lowest 1,400 calories maybe on my lowest days. And that was the thing that changed my leanness from my previous years without Joe to using Dr. Joe. And then we used different rep ranges. We didn't change, like whatever got you the muscle, you stick with as the training goes. I do not start changing to higher volume. Not to say that I will use higher volume in my training with my clients at points, because I'm a big person in my training is using like a lot of undulating periodization. So I will use DUP, and I will use various rep ranges throughout the week with my clients. So I love using different rep ranges because your muscles can get something from all rep ranges, as long as you're getting, close to failure in any of those rep ranges. Obviously, the higher you go, the harder that is to feel the right type of failure. And then on top of that, it just takes longer when you start letting your reps get carried away. So, this is where, like I said, you can, like there's a broad number that I've seen, a lot of people use the 5 through 30 rep range. And that generally is a pretty good idea. But most of I say the 5 to 15 range is probably your sweet spot, I would say, for most people.
Let me bring in a quote from you to highlight your position. Is that all right?
Okay. Yes.
Too many people leaving too many reps in the tank. To understand true failure, use a weight that you fail before you reach your reps required. You'll understand what a true push is. And that sort of, to me, highlights why that 5 to 15 might be that sweet range. Once you get up into the 30 rep range, are you sure that you're close to failure on those 30 reps? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm like I said, I've seen this with, whether you see other trainers or even yourself, and you're working with a client and you put them through the whole reps thing, and you say, okay, let's do this dumbbell bench press for 12 reps. Okay, now you just did that. Now let's do the second set. And I'm going to say, I want you to do this till you can't even push another rep. And people don't fully understand. And even some bodybuilders too, sometimes, even young kids, even women are notorious for this. I'm not picking on a sex, but they just not most of the bodybuilders, because they understand it now. But you have to push to failure to get what you want, as far as full mechanical tension and full failure to get the hypertrophy ends of what you want to get. And people don't get that until they fully, and this is where, okay, just try and bring every set to failure in the beginning, because get them to understand it. Then you just say, then you got to be more, once you understand that, then you can be more selective in how you bring about your failure. Like you can staying within that 1 to 3 reps of failure. And maybe on that last set of that exercise, you bring that to full failure. Then you kind of know where you stand. And I'd rather see someone actually, you were supposed to get maybe 6 on that last set, and they end up getting a 5. I'd rather them get a 5 on that than a hard 6, or maybe even still have 1 left in the tank, because I know they pushed as hard as they could, as long as they don't get stuck under the bar or anything. But yeah, it's the best way to challenge someone and let them feel what it really feels like being under that weight.
Which really goes back to what you were talking about earlier, which is why powerlifting might be such a great base for bodybuilding. With powerlifting, the point of the sport is a 1 rep max in competition for squat, dead, and bench. And so once you know what that feels like, you are more capable of pushing to failure in the sort of bodybuilding arena.
Of course, yes. Yep. And you understand it. And whether you have a spot there or you don't, even like I tell some of my girls, they're sometimes afraid to do a barbell press because they don't want to get stuck under the bar. And whether you get a spot, well, then, start out with something lighter. If you don't have me there, or you don't have someone there to spot you, then just back off a little bit and just know when you got to put the bar back, that you can, hopefully not get stuck under the bar. I mean, a squat, you can drop to the pins if needed, in a deadlift bar, you just let it go back to the floor. But those are those are so, so important to work towards failure. And that's,
Most
I
definitely.
really appreciated the time where I stopped, after my surgery. I didn't get back into bodybuilding right away again. And it taught me a lot of stuff by going into the powerlifting realm and understanding some of those things, as far as, the deadlift and the commands, and how everything, taught you how to push yourself and warm up properly, and do things that way. There's a lot of overlap in those two sports. Obviously one's built more for strength and one's built more for volume, you could say. But at the end of the day, I think they both can really overlap, and you could see a lot of people do both. Even like Lane became a pro bodybuilder before he became a champion powerlifter. Lane Norton. And he comes from the same town as Dr. Joe originally. They're
That was
both from
my first
Evansville,
encounter with
Indiana.
natural bodybuilding.
What's that?
Yeah, with Lane.
Lane?
Lane Norton was my first
Okay.
encounter with natural bodybuilding. So I found him back in the 2010s. So he came from Dr. Joe, and so that was my first encounter. I just watched him on Reels do a 600 double on the squat, and I was like, yeah, that man is he is still powerlifting and grinding away. So it's really nice to see.
And his femur lengths are not the best for what he does either, and he still pulls tremendous weights, because it causes him to lean over and do more of the powerlifter, the low bar squat for him. That works well for him. Like Joe was like his mentor growing
and that's
up,
where genetics
and
comes into play, really.
learned. Yep, and those two guys have really, to me, taken over a lot of the stuff that's really been brought forth in the natural bodybuilding world. Together, the two of them. Lane's a little more boisterous and a little more out there and lets everybody know about it, which I'm fine with. I'm not, like I said, I don't sit there and sugarcoat anything, and I'm not, when you're going to get into this stuff, and even if it's powerlifting, and then the bodybuilding is a little more, but to me, you got to stick with something. It's hard. You can't go through any of these preps and be uncomfortable and not be, you can't be comfortable. You have to be uncomfortable. You have to work. And I've seen where people back off at the end. You could just tell because of the way they look, or the way they don't want to get to that last final phase. And it can be, draining. It can be brain fog. It can be, a bunch of things, but that's where you separate the best of the best. I mean, when you get to the pro ranks, then you're dealing with a lot of genetics and how well they show them off, because that's the telltale sign of where, like I know where I stand in pro bodybuilding. Because, when I got my pro card back in 21 with the OCB at Joe Franco's show, when it was still, well, he had it at AC for a little bit before moving it back to Burlington in Jersey. And I won an overall against a kid that was half my age in the tall class, and he probably had 20 or 30 pounds on me. And I just went out there in the overall. I won the short class, he won the tall class, and I was at 50 years old that year, and I just went out there and I said, I'm gonna make this guy work for his pro card, because I didn't think I had a shot at beating him, and the judges saw it differently, and I won my second pro card in the OCB in 2021 at the Natural New Jersey Open. So yeah.
Oh, congrats. I mean, you never can tell what the judges are seeing.
Yeah.
And so,
I looked, that everything came together in that show too. And that was one of my best looks to date too, even as I can recall. And you just never know how things are gonna. I prepped myself for that show using all of my knowledge from all the years of working with Dr. Joe and everything. I finished that off that year and finally got it back into, like, I finally said, screw my knees. I'm going back into bodybuilding. I don't care how ugly my knees look sometimes. and just get back into it. And my quads, my legs probably came back, and I'd say they're still probably 95% of what they used to be. Like, that's about where I am as far as the look of them, the size of them. But it was a long road back to try and build them, but they came back pretty well.
Fantastic. Let's talk about something like peak week. How important is peak week?
Well, it's not important at all if you're not ready. That's the number one thing. If you are not lean enough, then don't even bother. Just keep trying to get leaner, and don't even bother with the peak week. But the peak week, when you are lean enough, can do amazing things to fill you out, to make you look tight, make you look crisp, make you look veiny. make you look everything that you want to be as far as your class goes. To, you know, the big thing is to not make too many changes to too many variables, but find averages in there to not play around with too many things. Like, I don't believe in changing water too much. I'm not dehydrating person. I'm not taking water away. I'm actually, for probably most people, I usually give them a little more water the day before the show, because the sodium will go up a little bit, and I'm talking minor amounts. But my water and sodium, I generally leave as an average. So I ask my clients, where's your water average? Where's your sodium average? And we will stick with that for most of the peak week. The carbohydrates are probably your biggest and easiest player in all of this. And the newest, and I know this is probably now a good for at least 5-6 years, Joe started using a linear peak week, where you slowly load up into the day of the show. And I've really come to see that as one of the better ones. I know you can front load, I know you can back load, and you can really go low and then jam it up. But I've worked with this with quite a few people, and it's worked very well, where I will try and, either, depending on the person, hit a higher end carb day on Wednesday, Thursday, and then depending on what they look like on Friday, I can drop down and tighten them. Or we can go with more depending on what has happened, as I do pictures and weight every day of peak week to look at them every morning after the previous day, because carbs take longer than what people think to set in. It's a 24 to 48 hours for carbs to truly set in, the ones that you're taking in peak week. So you have to kind of let that go. And even on the day of the show, you don't want to lose what you did, but you want to make sure you maintain what you did. And this is where you give them just enough food, but there's no reason to go to town, because most of that, and then you're going to wonder, if you went to town on the day of the show, go look at yourself on the day after the show, and you're like, man, I looked amazing. Yeah, because your carbs are just hitting you from all the insane food you just ate, you know, the day of the show, and even probably, you know, after the show, after they went out on top of it. So this is where you know, peak week is so vital. I do, you know, little bits of blood flow movement. I do a slight taper for the workouts. I've actually decreased the taper a little bit more than what I used to do, because I think that you can get more solid pushes with the carbs and the workouts being a little harder, where I will actually try and do a good, not a full all out workout, but like the day of the show, like after your first meal, which is like probably like 5-7 hours away from where you're supposed to be on stage, I will do a good upper body workout for whatever class they're in, because I think it will shuttle the first meal where it needs to go. It will also like tighten them up even a little bit too, even if they're, maybe, say, you know, they look a little soft or something, because maybe they, you know, maybe the carbs just were a little too much. And you can play that line, and then you can almost compensate the next morning, and that's where you get a good night's sleep, because some of that can be taken care of by just having a good night's sleep. And then when you get up for your first meal, you get some good blood flow going. You get a little, I'm a big believer, and I don't remember, it was one of the seminars, or no, the certifications I took back in the day. Eric Helms taught one of the classes, and Mike Zordis taught one of the classes. It was called Shredded by Science. This was years ago, and Luke Johnson and another guy ran it, and it was a pretty good program. And they talked about the bike in there, and the thing that happens when you get on a bike for cardio, and I'm talking about even just the recumbent or the regular bike, you get a good range of motion through your entire leg. Where if you walk on a tread, it's a very abrupt range of motion through your knees and your legs, even on an elliptical. So now when you're using the bike and you get your legs moving that way, you'll get a bigger pump out of your legs. And just because you're sitting on your butt, it's not always the worst thing, because now you're letting the legs do the work, and they're getting a nice little movement that you would not get through any piece of cardio. And I've had a lot of my clients do it, and it actually can really help their legs over time. And we even do that the morning of, something light, and then you just go into that good little pump beforehand. Big advocate of the bike. I really, and I even like outdoor bike rides for when I can do it, if, you know, depending on if I'm prepping or something. I grew up riding my bike when I was young, and I love riding a bike. I used to have BMX bikes back in the day, and now that's gone to mountain bike. But yeah.
Well, I'm curious. So that to me is a good timeline for an athlete who is prepared on time for their show. Have you ever had athletes who were ready weeks early? And did that differ? Sort of this concept of being perma-peaked is out there. How do you handle an athlete who is just like, oh gosh, you're ready now and your show's 3 weeks out? Does that look different?
If they're truly ready, you can start to actually reverse them into the show. And Joe has talked about this numerous times with metabolic peaking and getting them ready ahead of time. And that's never a bad thing, where you could start to bring their food back up. And it's not major amounts, but it's a little bit. And they'll take anything they can get at that point. And when you're doing that, it's great to see them, and their body will continue to burn more fat, even though you're giving them more food, because that starts to bring back hormones a little bit that were being really shut down, whether it's your ghrelin, the hunger hormones that come back in, and even if you could feel a little more test because you're doing just a little more food as you go into the show. That's like I threw Kristen into the Apex 3 weeks at we were just going into the Yorton, and I said she's ready, so I threw her in, and she drove 9 hours to Virginia and went and did the show, and she was ready. And I think that was her best look of all 3 shows that we did, and it was incredible and how she did that show. And even with just some amateurs, like if you see a show sometimes and you feel they're ready to go, you can say, well, look, there's a show coming up. Then I'll look for an OCB show that's where the late fee is. And we'll look at the late fee and we'll say, we'll look at their body just before the late fee kicks in. And then I'll throw them into the show if I feel like they're ready. Because I am not throwing a person just on stage just to do a show. I will not do that. But if I feel they're ready and we can still get them in at the regular price of the show, that's what I'll use as a gauge. And that'll give us a good 2 or 3 weeks before the show, because I do a different depletion workouts that start about 2 weeks out from the show. And I do these very hard workouts and usually lower carbs, lower calories. And then it's going to separate them. It's going to make them, do what's needed to finish off their prep. And I do that right into the show. And then it kind of goes into the taper and then a little push before the stage.
Craig, I've had a fantastic time picking your brain. I appreciate you. Hope to do this again soon.